In the PC case world, there are just some things that don't go very well together. One of them is big boy 3090s and small form factor cases. But apparently, Raijintek found a solution. Meet the Raijintek Ophion Evo, a tiny box of aluminum capable of showing off what your kidney was going for. The small form factor PC case world is pretty complicated. Not only do you need to stay underneath that 20-liter volume line, but then that nasty issue appears of do you want the case to be wider to support higher CPU coolers or longer to fit longer GPUs such as big boy 3090s. But you can't really have both after a certain degree cause well, you will quickly be over the 20-liter volume line, which means that you no longer have a small form factor case. The way Raijintek solved this issue is by concentrating fully on GPU support and kinda subconsciously telling you use an AIO. Of course you can do whatever you want, right? But with a max CPU cooler height of 90mm, you'll be forced to decide between things like a Nokia NH-L9i, L12S or a Be Quiet Shadow Rock LP, which are good coolers for their size, but you will never be able to compete with a glorious 240mm AIO. For the GPU on the other hand, this trade-off means that you can go with up to 330mm long dual slot monsters. This does mean that a Founders Edition is off the table because of the 3 slots that it needs, but basically 90% of the existing 3090s are good to go. Or any card underneath, like my fake 3090, which is actually just a 2080 Super. But with that said, let's cover the rest of the specs. Inside this small form factor Ophion Evo, we can go with a normal sized ATX power supply, which is mounted at the very front of the case, with a power cord extension coming in at the bottom. The exact max length of the PSU is not specifically mentioned, though I would recommend to stick to that standard 140mm length, as anything longer may start to interfere with the fans, which are meant to be above. Right next to it we got the ITX motherboard, but it's slightly different than we are used to. As inside the Ophion Evo the motherboard is placed on the right side of the case, we need to turn it around, making the PCIe slot come out in the top. The left side of the case is reserved to show off that monstrous behemoth of a card. And as said before, we have support for up to 330mm long 2-slots cards, so basically you have a free pass to do whatever you want, except for that one Founders Edition 3090, but come on, it's a small form factor case. Pre-installed, Raijintek also includes a Gen 3 PCIe riser. And yes, it is not Gen 4 while I'm talking about RTX 3000 cards, but as many benchmarks showed, the difference is extremely small and will only start to show up once you max out some games above 100 FPS. So theoretically, you could switch it out, and I think it would be nice if Raijintek did like an automatic update on their side, but for me personally, I would not bother about that cable. One thing to note though, even though it seems natural to route that PCIe extension through that big hole and leave it there, as it looks like this makes a lot of sense, but actually you have to place it behind the motherboard and route it to the top. Of course you can go through the bottom, nothing is stopping you, right? But as we reverse the motherboard, we have the PCIe slot at the top, which would then completely block off the CPU cooler or water block pump cover, which is sitting on top. So in terms of drives, we have actually quite a lot of support. That big fat hole in the bottom is doubling to support for 2 2.5-inch drives or 1 full 3.5-inch drives. Then to make even more, we can unmount the front panel, which reveals another 2 2.5-inch spot, which can be used with these rubber slide-in pieces. Right underneath these spots, we have the I/O. With one USB 3.0 Type A and one USB 3.0 Type C, we might not have the absolute highest possible speed standard, but it should be enough for everyday use. For the cooling, we have 3 possible fan spots. A 120mm spot inside that big fat hole, though don't forget that this does come at the cost of a hard drive support, and 2 120mm spots in the top. All of these coming with a magnetic dust filter. So although Raijintek does not explicitly say use an AIO, they do include one in basically every product image on their site, whereas there is not even a single image with an air cooler. And after using this puppy for a couple of days now, I can absolutely say this is meant for water cooling, period. Preferably a 240. For the overall dimensions, this 175mm wide, 375mm deep and 290mm high case sums up at roughly 19 liters. The front panel is made out of very good looking brushed aluminum, while both sides of the case are covered in 3mm thick tempered glass side panels, mounted on top another brushed aluminum panel using the usual thumb screws and capable of showing off both your AIO and whatever you spend your kidney on. Let's go a bit deeper into that overall look and feel of the case. First off, the brushed aluminum front looks amazing. Having real actual aluminum instead of a piece of plastic with a paint job does make a difference, and overall it feels pretty sturdy and well made. There might be a bit of a flex on the panel where you mount everything, but I would still describe it as okay. The feet are also pretty interesting. Most of the time, feet are made out of plastic and have a piece of rubber just glued underneath to protect your desk. But here, Raijintek made the whole thing out of rubber. Cool, I guess? But what's not so cool is that there is a discrepancy between the marketing material and the actual product. You see, in that fancy video Raijintek created and every product shot, the plate behind the PSU looks like this, whereas the actual product looks like this. Now, I'm not saying that how I got it is bad, it totally makes sense. Without this, how will you route your cable to the front of the case without potentially running into the fans? What I believe what happened here is that the video and the product shots were actually made with something like an early sample, and that shortly afterwards they realized that the cables are hitting the fans, thus they quickly changed it up but forgot to take the pictures, except for the white ones. That one has the hole, except for the bracket. I don't know, but overall it's a minor issue as you are not able to see that part of the case anyway once everything is installed. I just believe that they should redo the images with the actual product just to be fully transparent here. I'm also not fully satisfied with how the top of the case looks like, because the front panel is made of aluminum in a brushed design, while the top where the fans will go is made out of plain steel. The transition between the two is therefore quite obvious and does not look appealing at all. A fix for that would be either to make the top out of aluminum or create like a separate bracket, just like the side panels, which is like sit on top, but that involves way too much money. A good alternative would be to just make the fan filter a bit bigger, thus covering the whole area and just hiding that there is metal. When I first looked at the case online, I immediately had two concerns. Does the tempered glass side panel allow the GPU to breathe at all? And if so, what about the dust? And surprisingly enough, Raijintek had an idea for both issues. Obviously, Raijintek made sure that there is a bit of space in between the actual case and the glass. With a 0.5 cm of an air gap, it is by no means enormous, but if it works, it works. So we benchmarked it using a 5600X clock at 4.6 GHz and 1.3 V core with a Cooler Master Liquid ML240L ARGB and/or EVGA 2080 Super and an Arctic P12 in the bottom. We tested the limits of the case. While hitting the CPU as hard as we could and adding a firmware stress to the 1080p max settings, the CPU was sitting at 81 degrees C and the GPU also at 81 degrees C. After removing the side panel, the temp slowly came down to 79 degrees C and 77 degrees C. Of course, open air will always be better than inside of a case, most of the time at least, and there is a bit of a hit that you need to take into account inside the Ophion Evo. But 4 degrees C on the GPU, as this GPU that takes most of the hit, 4 degrees are quite a lot, but really not as bad as many other cases I've seen so far. And surprisingly enough, that 0.5mm of an air gap does allow for more air to get in than I initially expected. But what about the dust? Well, dust is a funny concept inside the Ophion Evo. Sure, Raijintek has a dust filter in the bottom and a big one at the top, which is nice, but kinda useless. With a 0.5 cm gap, the GPU will just suck in all of the dust, which will then be collected by the top filter after it went through the whole case. Of course, I would still leave the top filter on as it really enhances the aesthetic of the case, but it just can't do its job out of the box. But Raijintek got you covered. Inside the bag of goodies, they include these strings of foam. Now, it took a bit until I realized what this is for, as none of the images really show it off, but the manual did kind of explain it. This is actually an optional dust filter for the side panels. If you wanted to, you can take some pieces, glue them around both side panels, and once you mount them down, these 0.5 cm of air gap have an actual air filter, which is a very unique way of dealing with this. Of course, I was immediately concerned that this would create an even bigger hit on the GPU, so we ran the tests again with that foam in there. As expected, the GPU got a bit hotter at 83 degrees C, but what I do appreciate here is the optional approach. Not everybody got a dusty home, not everybody got pads, and I even read that some people actually clean the PC once in a while, so for those who prefer a couple of degrees, they can leave it out, and the other ones can just go dust free. Actually pretty cool. The last thing I wanted to talk about is a missed opportunity. Even though the GPU sucks most of its air through that 0.5 cm gap, the bottom fan does help that, and it is responsible for most of the air that the top 240mm AIO will get. And although the holes which are caught in there are big enough to take advantage of a 140mm fan, it only has the 120mm fan hole. This again is one of the many times that a case misses 140 support, although it could benefit from it. Especially in this case, as the 140mm fan is protruding way more over the GPU, and it is actually easier for it to blast the air in front of the GPU fans. To put this into numbers, I just replaced my P12 with a P14 without actually mounting it down. Here the GPU temps fell to 81 degrees C. That's a really big missed opportunity, and I don't even think that the 10 to 20% more air that a P14 can push are making this 2 degrees difference. It's probably more the way they are positioned. Now there is substantially more wing space which is capable of pushing air in front or into the GPU, whereas a P12 is barely making it halfway across the card. So where does this leave us? Well, overall the case is very interesting. It got big boy GPU support, mid-sized boy AIO support, and fully fetched ITX PSU support. All of which, while still coming in at 90 liters as a small form factor case, and having worked with a lot of small form factor cases, having all three of these is quite impressive. Design-wise, it's up to you. For me, the brushed aluminum front and side pad with dual tempered glass side panel showing off the hardware just looks really good, except for the top panel. The I/O is up to date, the feet are very much okay, and the cooling concept works. So feature-wise, compatibility and build quality are all very good. The only two things that you would need to keep in mind is that the case is absolutely meant for water cooling, and cable management is a nightmare. I tried hiding my brutally obnoxious piece of art, but honestly, I did whatever I could, but there just isn't any space to hide them. My best guess is to recommend to use this in combination with like an Arctic Freezer 240, which doesn't have like the whole cable tree going on, just 2 cables if you have the ARGB version or 1 if you have the non-RGB version. For the price, as of writing this script, it is going for around 110 euros or $125, which for a small form factor case is still very much alright, as these cases tend to be really expensive. But okay, this should be it for the Raijintek Ophion Evo. At this point I would like to thank Raijintek for providing me this beautiful and very interesting case. And also thank you for watching this video. I hope you've enjoyed it, and if so, make sure to leave your opinion with a thumb up, thumb down and the comment section below. And if you want to keep watching, here's another small factor case which might be interesting for you. Okay, thank you for watching, see you next time, bye bye.